الرحيم. اطلب العلم أخي فهو درب به نور، به ترقى به تحيا عالما حرا فخور.
اطلب العلم أخي فهو درب به نور، به ترقى به تحيا عالما حرا فخور. اطلب العلم أخي فهو درب به نور، به ترقى به تحيا عالما حرا فخور.
سل إماما عاش في العلم دهورا ودهور، يطلب العلم ببذل حتى ضمته البحور.
سل إماما عاش في العلم دهورا ودهور، يطلب العلم ببذل حتى ضمته البحور. صابرا في العلم صبرا حتى سموه الصبور، يخرج العلم بفأل مثل ريحان الزهور. صابرا في العلم صبرا حتى سموه الصبور،
يخرج العلم بفأل مثل ريحان الزهور.
اطلب العلم أخي فهو درب به نور، به ترقى به تحيا عالما حرا فخور. اطلب العلم أخي فهو درب به نور، به ترقى به تحيا عالما حرا فخور.
كن إذا سموك اسما لتكن مثل الحضور، كن رفيقا كن عظيما كن كما تلك صقور. كن إذا سموك اسما لتكن مثل الحضور، كن رفيقا كن عظيما كن كما تلك صقور.
راقيا بالعلم نحو النجم مزدان شكور،
رافضا كل التدني رافضا نفس الغرور.
اطلب العلم أخي فهو درب به نور، به ترقى به تحيا عالما حرا فخور. اطلب العلم أخي فهو درب به نور، به ترقى به تحيا عالما حرا فخور.
ابن مسعود فقيه علم أحيا القفور، فإذا أعطاك رأيا كان سهما في النحور. ابن مسعود فقيه علم أحيا القفور، فإذا أعطاك رأيا كان سهما في النحور.
وعلي ثم بالدين معاذ لا يبور،
اقرأوا التاريخ تروي عنه أفواه سطور.
اطلب العلم أخي فهو درب به نور، به ترقى به تحيا عالما حرا فخور. اطلب العلم أخي فهو درب به نور، به ترقى به تحيا عالما حرا فخور.
إن سألت عن إمام أو فقيه في الأمور، ابن عباس ترنم وسيبقى في الصدور. إن سألت عن إمام أو فقيه في الأمور، ابن عباس ترنم وسيبقى في الصدور.
فهو كالشمعة تذهب حتى تأتينا بنور،
ساهر بالليل علم وبأوقات سحور.
اطلب العلم أخي فهو درب به نور، به ترقى به تحيا عالما حرا فخور. اطلب العلم أخي فهو درب به نور، به ترقى به تحيا عالما حرا فخور.
إذ بكى النبي يوما سمعا صوتا جهور، يا أبي كم روت عنك الليالي والعصور. إذ بكى النبي يوما سمعا صوتا جهور، يا أبي كم روت عنك الليالي والعصور.
أنتم اليوم كنبت قد علا فوق الجذور،
يا أساس الدين يا صرحنا يا صلب صخور.
اطلب العلم أخي فهو درب به نور، به ترقى به تحيا عالما حرا فخور.
الحمد لله رب العالمين، الصلاة والسلام على سيدنا Muhammad وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Dear brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Brothers and sisters, today, as many of you know, and I'm sure you've been following our advertisement, the discussion today is going to be a very amazing discussion, a discussion with a scholar, a teacher, an author, a historian, and a leader in the Muslim community, you both here in the United States and in abroad in many ways. We have with us today the author of this book. I've really talked a lot about this book throughout last week, and subhanAllah, a lot of you brothers and sisters were sharing it and asking for the link to buy it and to read it. These are rare books, brothers and sisters, that need to be read, that need to be discussed, that need to be in many ways understood in every aspect. because when we talk about Islam, and when we talk about the struggle for Islam, it has been the brothers like Sheikh Muhammad Jaaber and his family, and the brothers and scholars like him, indigenous people from here, from yani African Americans, who have really done the work to make sure that Islam is always, yani the struggle for Islam and the representation and presentation of Islam has been done by the people who have born and raised here, not just yani, in the last 400 years in many ways. So let me give you a more proper introduction to the Sheikh. SubhanAllah, Sheikh Muhammad ibn Hisham Jaaber, Hafidhullah, is a forensic historian with a special interest in Islamic and African and American history. He is also son of late Hajj Hisham Jaaber, who performed the final funeral rites for our brother scholar Malcolm X, rahmatullah alayh, as one of the eldest remaining members of the AAUAA, the oldest chartered Orthodox Islamic organization in America, dating all the way back to 1930 or 30s. Muhammad Jaaber has witnessed firsthand much of history and evolution of Islam in America unfold. He is a lifelong student of knowledge with more than 50 years of combined research, training, and practical experience in Arabic language, Islamic studies, history, leadership, and da'wah. He is the author of Color Me Muslim and the director of many historical forums such as the 75 Years of Islam, Muslims of the African Diaspora, Children of Abraham Lost in History, and From Malcolm X to Al-Hajj, Malik Shahbaz. Currently, Muhammad ibn Hisham Jaaber is the executive director of BIMA, Bureau of Indigenous Muslim Affairs Incorporated. Sheikh Muhammad, welcome to Islamic Oasis Live.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah, Sheikh. First of all, it's an honor to have you here. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continue to use you and preserve and protect you for this deen and for this ummah. Wallah, yani, again, welcome to Islamic Oasis.
Alhamdulillah, I'm very honored and grateful to be a part of your program. And I'm very, very honored to be an instrument of the dawah in this society. So anything that I can contribute, inshallah, I'm willing and always available for that, inshallah.
Inshallah. Sheikh, let's start this conversation. There's so much to talk about yani from the book that you've commented on, and there's a whole commentary by you. Your dad seems to be also a very prolific, and he's somebody who was writing a lot. Sheikh, why is it important to understand, let's say, Malcolm X, before I even go to the book? Why such a book that talks about Malcolm? What's this legacy that we need to know of who this man was?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I tell you, Sheikh Muhammad Shadazi, I've read many books about the life of Hajj Malik Shabazz, Malcolm X. And I find that for the most part, the people who try to articulate his life are non-Muslims. And that's a very, very unique aspect of his life that's been undermined or downplayed. And we saw the necessity to project Malcolm back into the society and allow the people to view him through the lens of a Muslim. Malcolm himself is still frozen in time as a Black nationalist, a Pan-Africanist, a Black activist, and many of those accolades that's been ascribed to him today, Malcolm himself discarded them. Upon his conversion to Orthodox Islam, he moved away from that. He rejected a lot of those ideas. And, again, Malcolm was a transforming individual. He was an evolving Muslim. And I think that what has happened, that the journalists and the authors of his life have not relied on the last year of his life. I think they've looked back into the archives of history, the Black Power struggle, and they have been stuck there. And people, especially the new generation, are unaware of the Islam of Malcolm, what it is to be a Muslim, the principles and the values and the disciplines that govern the last portion of his life. And that was one of the reasons why we wanted to bring that book again to the public.
And Sheikh, what is your relationship to Malcolm X? I mean, you almost write this as almost as if he was your uncle. I mean, he was. It seems like he was very close to the family. I mean, how? Give me a little bit of his history with you, your family, and Subhanallah, to be able to do Salatul Janaza obviously means, it has to be something special.
Well, I tell you, you mentioned in my introduction that I am the recipient of the oldest Islamic Sunni organization in America that was founded in the 30s by the late Sheikh Muhammad Azzuddin. And my father being the imam of 14 units at that particular time. And he was a part of that transitional team for Malcolm. Many people are unaware that Malcolm was seeking Sunni Islam 2 years before he actually left the Nation of Islam. He would have secret meetings with Sheikh Shawarbi at the Islamic Center in New York at 72nd Street and Riverside. And my father was a part of that transitional team. Malcolm himself concealed that, and it didn't come out in his memoirs that he actually was meeting with Muslims. So that's the kind of like early relationship, the early bond that we had. And a lot of the things that have come out in the books, I call it late literature, late narratives, because we knew about this history of Malcolm, those things that he concealed long before they were discovered. So my father was a part of that transitional team, and my father would always tell me, we're just waiting for Malcolm to come over. And as long as he was a member of the Nation of Islam, we didn't interfere. We didn't want to actually stimulate the conflicts and the confusion that was going on. So that was the early relationship. Also, Sheikh Dawud Faisal was one of the early pioneers of Islam. He established Islamic Mission in America in the 30s, and he himself also was a mentor to Malcolm. Again, Malcolm concealed all of this because he didn't want the Nation of Islam to know that he was actually interacting with the Sunni Muslims.
So, is Malcolm X, before he becomes Malik al-Shahbaz, Sheikh, what is what is happening intellectually? I mean, I guess what's happening in the mind of Malcolm X? Is it he understands that if he comes to Islam, he's a threat? What's the political environment like? Because obviously this is a very tough decision, or at least it's a very. This will affect the lives of millions of people in the U.S.
Oh, without a doubt, what had happened is that Malcolm himself had built an organization. If we look at the very rudiments of the Nation of Islam, when Malcolm came on board, there was very few members. They weren't organized. They weren't a force to be contended with. So when Malcolm got involved, he built the organization himself.
So he's the builder.
He is the builder himself.
He is the builder. Okay, so Malcolm X was, and it's not that Nation of Islam built him. He built Nation of Islam.
Yes, he built the Nation of Islam to the point that he outgrew the very theological tenets. He felt very restricted in that manner. Case in point, the Nation of Islam, they were non-involved in the movement for social justice. They stood on the sideline prior to Malcolm's involvement. They stood on the sideline and they called people to Black nationalism or a separate state. It was more or less like a utopia, something that wasn't really applicable in the society. But when Malcolm got involved, he began to bring to the people's minds the possibility of a victory. And again, remember that Malcolm himself had an early orientation with the Marcus Garvey movement. His father was actually a head of a chapter. He was the president of a Marcus Garvey chapter. His brothers were deeply involved in Marcus Garvey chapter. So Malcolm himself was on the sideline as a rebel because he was very frustrated. But once he got his mind and his footing in place, he began to build the organization. And he built it. If you look at the theology of the Nation of Islam, and you look at the platform in which Malcolm stood upon, he never advocated that theology. In fact, to a certain degree, he was ashamed to actually make those type of presentation about, Farad being a god
Yeah,
and things of
you
that
barely ever
nature.
hear that. He'll say honorable and this and that, but he will never say.
Yeah, right. We never heard him actually advocate, appropriate that theology. He had reservations about that in his early life, but he was more concerned about social justice. He had an audience, a built-in audience. He had gained the attention of the American people, and he was using that as his platform. But deep inside of Malcolm, he was really looking for a solution, a real solution. And he could not find that, even though he was calling to Black nationalism, even though he was calling to Pan-Africanism, he knew that those ideas wasn't practical.
So, Sheikh, let's go back a little bit more. I mean, what built Malcolm X, Sheikh, intellectually? Is it, I mean, obviously how did he grow up? What's his background as far as, I mean, it's not like he went to some top grade university and he comes out a top level intellectual, but this man, his mind is something else. I mean, so what builds him, Sheikh? Where is these ideas, this courage and bravery coming from?
Yes, again, Malcolm himself, come from a very, very intellectual background. His mother was an educator. His father was involved in the social revolution for justice. A lot of these things about his early life is suppressed. Malcolm is projected as a disgruntled youth who actually turned to drugs and crimes and things of that nature. But Malcolm had a background. He had a foundation, and even his sister Ella Collins, when she took him as a teenager to live with her in Boston, because he was actually a delinquent student in the white schools, she felt that he would best, develop with her, and she was an educator herself. So Malcolm was exposed. He was exposed. It's just that he was in a state of denial. But when he was incarcerated, he had time to revisit his past, and he was incarcerated with people that had intellectual ambitions, and Malcolm himself disciplined himself to relearn how to re-enter, into the social struggle. He was looking for a platform. I think that Malcolm would have grabbed onto any platform that met his expectations or his ambitions. And one unique character about Malcolm is that when he entered into the social revolution, the justice movement, he entered in it with the intentions of finishing the journey. When most people, they enter into an organization or a religious affiliation, as they learn with inside of that, then they decide that they want to start getting involved, become active. But Malcolm entered with the intention of being active from the very offset. And that's why he himself was elevated and in the ranks real rapidly, because of his zeal and his conviction and commitment. And again, he was a very honest person, and he had courage, and he knew that the choice was life or death. Whether he was a Black nationalist, whether he was a Pan-Africanist, or he was a national representative for the Nation of Islam, he knew that the information that would come from him was a death wish, and he was ready and willing to receive that. And that's what made him so unique. Now, there was other intellectuals, social scientists that was, in the environment. The 60s, the 50s and 60s was replete with revolutionary mind states. We had the decolonization of Africa. We had the Marxists. We had the socialist movements. We had all of these movements, but they didn't have structure. They didn't have structure. They did not have the ability to organize. So Malcolm himself was unique in that. And also the other Muslims that were in the backdrop, the Orthodox Sunni Muslim, for example, and we'll talk about the AAUA later on down the line, how they was able to maneuver into society and call people to Islam, to neutralize what we call the frustration that exists in the racial climate of Black and white, so forth and so on. But Malcolm was very unique because he took the front line and he was not afraid of the consequences.
So, subhanallah. I'm just trying to picture Malcolm, as Sheikh in why was America so worried about him, Sheikh? And what today, for instance, I mean, you have a lot of whatever this means as far as Black Lives Matter and things like this, because I see them being manipulated a lot, and then
Yes.
you so him coming to, even before he comes to Sunni Islam,
Yes.
intellectually he understands what's happening in America. It's very clear. He understands what's
Yes.
happening in America. He understands what, I mean, is it that he just understands what African Americans are going through, or is it just in general the situation of the political situation in the US, whether for blacks or for poor whites or for justice in general?
That's a very, very good question, and I'm going to expound upon it in a manner in which we all can benefit from it. Any organization that was subversive or deemed subversive or viewed subversive by the powers that be at that particular time, okay, was isolated, marginalized, and ostracized. We can go back to Marcus Garvey. Okay, the Marcus Garvey movement, they were met with resistance. They are FBI surveillance on that organization. We have the Adinullah Universal Arabic Association, the AAUAA, the organization that I'm a recipient, that was established in the 1930s. We have a file of 617 pages of FBI declassified files on that organization. So there was a very early suppression of any organization, okay, that they deemed subversive. Any organization that resisted the Jim Crow legislation was cited, and they were isolated and marginalized. So when Malcolm himself came on the scene, right, he was actually picking up the pieces of all these failed organizations. And most of the members that was gravitating towards Malcolm's dialogue, his delivery, was actually people that were ex-Garveyites, people that had been involved in the Moorish Science Temple of America, people that were even involved in some aspect of the Ahmadiyya Muslim movement at that particular time. So there was a seasoned audience, okay, waiting on leadership. And Malcolm himself understood that. And he was very brilliant in articulating that and bringing that to the forefront. Now, the climate itself in the 50s and 60s was very hostile, not only in the South. I myself, was born in the South. I experienced Jim Crow legislation. I can recall going to segregated schools, drinking from a water fountain that said colors only, getting your food from a takeout, things of that nature. So when I talk about Malcolm's life, to me, it's not history, it's an experience, because I can share in that same, time and climate. So when we talk about, and my father himself, okay, was involved in the social revolution, but the strength of the Nation of Islam is that there were organizations, okay, especially in the South, that promoted that, because they was calling for a separation, okay. They were against integration, and they were an interest group that wanted to compel that, to make sure that that got out in the open, that there are some blacks or there are some Negroes who don't want to integrate, okay. And the Nation of Islam only reinforced and justified Jim Crow legislation, that we should be separate. So there was many factors that gave Malcolm a platform, okay. Now in the North, he was protected. He was surrounded by people that was strong in that, people who had migrated from the South, because they was escaping persecution, they was escaping oppression, discrimination, and racism. So Malcolm was receiving these people as they came into his organization. However, if Malcolm would have preached that doctrine beyond and below the Mason-Dixon line, then the results would have been very different. The dynamics would have been very different. It would have been a very, very violent encounter, from the hate groups in the South. So again, Malcolm was given that platform because not only was he being embraced by people who were disgruntled and had an idea about segregation, they had an idea about discrimination and wanted to bring about a change. However, there was people in the South who was promoting that because he was reinforcing Jim Crow segregation.
So, Sheikh, then Malcolm X. Let's go further now. Malcolm. So, what is X, Sheikh? Here's the thing. There is so much to talk about, Sheikh. I'm really trying very hard to because this, as I told you when we were having our conversation, that this book each chapter could be an hour discussion, literally, because of the history that you're trying to tell within one chapter. There's so much going on. I mean, the picture itself is historical. Sheikh, I mean, before we continue with Malcolm, I just wanted to know why this picture. Is it because you were trying to make sure the world knows that Malcolm X died as a Sunni Muslim, as a Shaheed, and I mean, there has to be a purpose for this picture in the front of the book.
Yes, we chose that picture because that picture is always viewed, is always displayed at Malcolm's funeral. You would find that picture itself in the Ebony Black History Encyclopedia. You will find that picture in magazines across the nation. You will see that particular image in film clippings and things of that nature, but they never mention his name. They never mention the person name who did the janazah. And we see that is a suppression, okay, of Malcolm's Islam, because as we know as Muslims, if Malcolm would have died short of the Shahada, short of the confession that there's none worthy to be worshipped but Allah, and Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is the final messenger and prophet, then it would have been unlawful for the Muslims to pray over him. So this is a symbol that secures Malcolm's identity as a Sunni Muslim. And as I mentioned earlier, my father, right, who was the national imam of the Adinullahi Universal Arabic Association, right, championed the cause because as Malcolm, right, fell as a Muslim, he had rights over the Sunni community. And if he had not come forward to do the janazah, the Muslim Laws Incorporated or the Organization for Afro-American Unity, they were not qualified. And they did not have the proper knowledge to actually bury a Muslim. You must realize that the two organizations that Malcolm established were not based on Sunni Islam, okay? The Organization for Afro-American Unity was a political platform so Malcolm could continue to interact with those activists to bring about social justice. So he wanted to minimize the religion because of the fact that a lot of people was pushing back. They were so diverse. And the Muslim Mosque Incorporated was established before he made the pilgrimage. And they had abandoned the physical structure of the Nation of Islam. However, they still embraced their theology. So Malcolm leaving the Nation of Islam does not necessarily mean that he abandoned the theology. He believed in the theology and the philosophy of Elijah Muhammad. It was only in Mecca, okay, when he was in Ihram performing the pilgrimage, that he actually had his epiphany and converted to Islam. And the proof is in that when he wrote the letter back to the Muslim Mosque Incorporated, James 67X, who was the second in charge, received that letter. And he read the letter and he was upset and disappointed because Malcolm had converted to Sunni Islam and they wanted him to return. That's why Malcolm said, you will be surprised at some of the things that I'm saying in this letter. He had a epiphany and he changed his views. So they weren't qualified to actually perform the janazah. They weren't Muslim. They weren't under the shahada, and neither did they have the Islamic knowledge. Okay. Number two is that when my father came forward, right, to claim the body, he was met with hostility even from from members of the OAAU, and also from the Muslim Mosque Incorporated. And that's why you see Malcolm displayed in a Western suit. And then at the very last day, you see him in a shroud, which means that was an executive order, executive move by the Sunni Muslim to take charge of his body. That's why that picture is placed there as a record barrier that Malcolm is and was a Sunni Muslim.
And then, and subhanallah, and then you start with the ayah, يعني ولا تحسبن الذين قتلوا في سبيل الله أمواتا بل أحياء والأحياء عند ربهم يرزقون. Sheikh, I've never seen a book written on Malcolm X. Obviously, you know that starts with the ayah. يعني ولا تحسبن الذين قتلوا في سبيل الله أمواتا بل أحياء عند ربهم يرزقون. يعني Sheikh, this is a declaration in many ways that you're saying, look, he died shaheed.
Yes.
He died shaheed, and you dedicate a whole chapter to martyrdom of of Malcolm X rahmatullah alayh. Why is that so necessary to understand, Sheikh?
Yes, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. You see, most people are focused on who killed Malcolm. Our focus is on why Malcolm was killed and who wanted him killed. So we're looking at the broader picture. And we know that in the last days of Malcolm's life, he made it clear. He made it clear that he was a Sunni Muslim. And in fact, he asked Elijah Muhammad's son, the late W.D. Muhammad, Imam Wahdi Muhammad, to join him. To join him so that they could actually create or fortify themselves against the growth of the Nation of Islam. He was at that point ready to stop the growth of the Islam. And also Malcolm spent the latter part of his life making tawbah, meaning that he was very regretful for some of the things that he did, some of the things that he taught. And he said that, and by table talk, he was speaking to James 67X, Abdul Razak, and he told him, reminiscing, that you remember when the little white girl came to me and asked what could they do to help in the movement. And he said that nothing, you know, they couldn't be involved in the movement. And Malcolm said that he was regretful for even saying that. So, and also Malcolm did not have any, recourse. For example, when he invited Imam Wahdi Muhammad to join him, Imam Wahdi Muhammad had recourse. He just stood down and he just got off the scene and he was safe. And also Elijah Muhammad's other son, Akbar Muhammad, people don't know a lot about him. He's a graduate of Al-Azhar. He has a PhD and so forth and so on. And he was actually in Al-Azhar at the time studying Islam. And Malcolm himself sent him a telex saying, go on the record. You have to come public and denounce your father. And he called a press conference in Cairo, denouncing his father. So Malcolm himself had moved into the real sphere of Sunni Islam. And he told the members of the Muslim Mosque Incorporated and the Organization for Afro-American Unity that these organizations could no longer be permanent, you see. So we see Malcolm coming out as a Muslim. And we know that there were many people. Malcolm was surrounded by many circles of evil. Many people wanted Malcolm out the way because Malcolm came back. Okay, he came back with the formula. Okay, when he came back from Mecca. He said that if America could, in fact, accept Islam, okay, it would remove, the ills of racism. This is huge. This is a huge declaration, because he saw in Mecca, all right, what he had been taught in America by the Nation of Islam, okay, and the Black Power movement and the white hate groups, right, that the races could do better separate. But in Mecca, as I mentioned earlier, I can recall drinking from fountains, okay, and using toilets that says colors only. Now here we have El Hajj Malik Shabazz in Mecca, not only drinking from the same fountain, but drinking from the same vessel as someone, as white as an American, eating from the same plate and sleeping in the same tents and so forth and so on. This was an eye awakening. This was something that really touched his heart deep. And he saw the formula, because we saw Mecca was a microcosm of the human family. So he came back as a Muslim, and he had an opportunity to recant it, because you can recall before he went to Mecca, he wrote a letter to Elijah Muhammad saying that he wanted to come back, okay, that he was to apologize for the wrong that he done. This is before he left, okay. But when he came back, he wasn't apologetic anymore. He said, "I am a Sunni Orthodox Muslim, and I believe in Islam as it is practiced in Mecca, okay? And I'm not going to formulate my own version of Islam." So
Sheikh,
as a result of yes.
For instance, in India, when the British came to India, you had this Ahmadiyya movement and you had Qadiani movement. And these guys, they try to somehow circumvent, if not, they try to sabotage the struggle of the Muslims against the British. They used these, Qadianis or whatever to, let's say, to not talk about jihad anymore. They say jihad is over. There is no more struggle. Yeah. This is a whole... I mean, it seems... Is this... is Nation of Islam the Qadianis of India in many sense? Did they not want that Islam to be presented in India because of people then become ready for martyrdom? Because I mean, there is a struggle that begins that people become, subhanAllah, intellectually and... You see what I'm saying? I mean, they yes. want to... I mean, the death of struggle. I guess that's what I'm saying. They wanted to kill the struggle anywhere, anyhow, even if it's by your own kind.
Yes, I think that in the very beginning of the Nation of Islam, you could ascribe that those type of attributes to them. I think that Malcolm himself, he broke the rules. Okay, that what was contained for 20 years could no longer be contained by Malcolm. Case in point, we go back to, you mentioned the identification. There was an identification movement going on in America.
That we're going to have to discuss a lot, but I have a lot to ask about.
I tell you, when you look at you see, a lot of people are unaware of the organizations that preceded the Nation of Islam. The Moorish Science Temple of America, they had already discarded the colonialist names. They was erasing their last names, and they was adopting the names Bey and El, okay, to reconnect them to their Islamic identity. They understood that there was Moors who came to America by way of the Spanish ships. There was Moors that was present here as free colors that was able to move among, white America without any type of harassment, because they had a cultural and religious identity that was different from the so-called Negro in this society. Now, what was going to happen is that, when we look at our history, when you begin to search for your identity, then you will have discovered that 30% of all the slaves who arrived in America by way of the African diaspora was Muslim, meaning that 1 out of every 3 or 4 people that was in the plantation were Muslim. And if we could have turned our people back to that type of heritage, okay, then you would have saw a cultural outbreak of Muslims. just identifying, okay, with their cultural heritage, that would have been Islam. And Malcolm was on that particular path when he came back. And when he made the journeys to Africa, the Muslim countries and things of that nature, he was beginning to connect what was a domestic struggle to an international struggle. And as we know that the Muslim world at that time was also active, it was in a revolutionary state. And one of the key factors that is necessary in any revolution is to have allies and resources. And if we were so domesticated that we relied on virtually the enemy for our provision. So Malcolm had found another source, another source of not only inspiration, but also resources and possibly allies to further his struggle. So that within itself was impactful in America. And being a Muslim, okay, being a Muslim, not a member of the Moorish Science Temple, not being a member of the Ahmadiyya movement or the Nation of Islam, but being a Muslim of the 1.3 billion at that particular time gave him credence. It gave him, I wouldn't say power in a negative sense, but it gave him a sense of hope and confidence that now we could actually move forward. And he had the opportunity to take the United States to court, in international courts, okay, and convict them of human rights violation, bigger than civil rights violation, okay, and reach way back into the annals of our history from the very inception and show the mass violation, okay, and hypocrisy based on the Constitution that's supposed to govern a free nation. So definitely all of these elements led up to his assassination, and he did it in the name of Islam.
Sheikh, let me, when, for instance, now, because obviously there is a struggle, the struggle still continues. The Muslim world is struggling in every possible way. We have Syria going on, Afghanistan going on. We have, all of Egypt is in a situation, Tunis is in a situation, Libya is in a situation. Sheikh, but, even the revolutions, when they began, even the so-called Arab Spring, it starts in Africa. It starts in Tunis, then goes to Egypt, then goes to Libya, and then after that, then it goes to the Middle East. I mean, Sheikh, what is so special about Africa that, and if you think about it, if you are not intellectually aware, you cannot start a revolution. You have to be alive, you have to be sensitive, you have to be someone who knows what's going on. You have to have your fingers on the nerves. Then and only then can you be part of a revolution, because you know now that change is needed. What's so special about Africa, Sheikh, that people constantly, revolutions begin there?
Right. I think it's the reoccurrence of the revolution, because it goes all the way back to colonialism. And what has happened, and what did happen, is that when the African states began to decolonize themselves, meaning to uproot and reclaim their lands and eject foreign rule, the European rule and things of this nature, they didn't have a backup plan, meaning that they removed the Europeans, but yet and still they brought in the socialist or the Marxist ideal to fill that gap. Okay, so we're looking at the capitalist control of Africa that left the people destitute. Okay, and now you're looking at another hope coming in, socialism, to actually remove the rich, okay, which they call the elite class, and empower the laborers. Yeah, right, and empower the laborers to try to create that balance. And again, that was a failed institution. Why? Because it weakened the Muslims. Because to be a socialist, you have to actually divorce yourself of God or any type of divinity to guide you. And what has happened is that when the Muslim realized that socialism did not add anything to their program that the colonists did. So they saw themselves in the same situation. So it's a reoccurrence of the revelation of the revolution because of the fact that all these institutions that came in, Pan-Africanism, socialism, communism, they are failed institutions. When Islam itself was the solution, however, since the fall of the Caliphate in 1922, we have not been able to witness an Islamic state for over 200 years. So they did not have a workable model to bring back to replace, the colonial structures that was there. And now you see them revisiting the revolution, trying to uproot the socialists now. And it's going to continue because until they bring Islam in, you see, and that is the balance. Nothing is going to go away. And that is the same reason why we had the struggle in America, because of injustice and unfairness. And I think that the world could look at America, okay, in the early 20s and 30s, and it was apparent, it was obvious that there was oppressed people there. And America was beyond its borders, trying to bring about democracy and justice in foreign lands, while their own citizens was being restricted and they were being excluded from the social fabric of this country. So this is why Africa itself is the revolutionary society, because of failed institutions. You see, and again, like I said, until we.
But why is it that they see things that we are not seeing, Sheikh? Yani, for instance, the Middle East is in chaos. Everywhere there is. Yes, they're the masters are throwing some bread here and there, but but it seems like there is something that's there in these lands, especially in North Africa and others, of course. And now you look at Syria, subhanallah, and things are, but. Now, here's the question. How important is it for the Muslims here, whether African American Muslims or Muslims in general, that they really connect with their roots back home? And of course, I'm not coming. I'm coming from Islamic ideological point of view,
right,
not Afrocentric, but
right. Understand, and that's very important. You mentioned that because when we talk about the
and the reason, just one more thing, I want you to please connect, because if you look at, we are in this so-called African History Month or African American, and the thing, Sheikh, is it seems like it's almost what's being told to the African Americans here is that your history is only connected as far as slavery. You have nothing beyond that, and you have. If you look at the history of the Anbiya, and Musa alayhi salam and others, and Luqman alayhi salam, and you have people of such huge, and you have history that you cannot imagine, but they are stuck. Is it by design? And if you can cover this, go ahead, Sheikh.
Yes, I understand exactly what you're saying. I think that when we really look at identity in that context, is that when the people came to America by the way of the African diaspora. Okay, they came from the continent of Africa and from the peninsula of Andalusia, Spain, and they came with an identity. They came with a family, with a heritage, with cultural integrity. So when they came to the shores of America, they were labored as Negroes, as blacks, as coloreds. All of these names are colonial names. These are not the names that dignify these people. And it went on for generation after generation until the people began here, the so-called African American, see themselves as being different from the Africans. Why? Because they cannot identify culturally. They don't know whether they would identify with Islamic Africa, where they would identify with the traditionalists of Africa, or the what we call the socialist aspect of Africa. Africa is not a monolithic society, and America is not one America. You see, you have
that is an amazing point, Sheikh. America is not one America. That's true.
One America, and there are different worlds that operate simultaneously here. For example, and we're talking about the connection. How are we going to connect, okay, a people who has been socially classified? Okay, when the terms African American, Afro American, black, color, these are not ethnicity. These are social political classification for a displaced people who do not have an identity. So it's very difficult to connect them with the culture. For example, I identify with Islamic Africa. Okay. Then you may have another person who identifies with traditional Afrocentric Africa, which this is something that has been actually manufactured in America because it does not fit within inside of the African cultural trends. Okay. So to bring the African American back, okay, to his roots and connection, he has to look at who were these people before they came here. You see, because we're talking about now, not only did they change their identity, but they changed their culture, their language, and their religion. And it would be very difficult to just say, as an African American people or a black people, that we can achieve. Because when we get at the top of the mountain, then we're going to have to decide how we're going to govern ourselves. And that's what happened. And that's why it's very important that we understand the early elements. If you go back to the very early elements of revolution in America, it was connected to Islam. Marcus Garvey himself was tutored by Deuce Ali, okay, who gave him a platform of Pan-Africanism, okay. We have Drew Ali, who established the Moorish Science Temple, who claimed Moorish heritage, which was an Islamic platform, okay. You have Seti Majid, who came in the 20s from Sudan. The very early struggles and revolutionary programs that was introduced to the African American was Islamic. It was Islamic, and no one has recorded this, and it's not in the history book. So to identify or to bring about a real cultural revolution in America, identity is paramount. Okay, I give you an example. We use the term African American as though that is an ethnic group of people. But it didn't come about until 1987 when Jesse Jackson himself at a black conference decided that they're going to name everybody the same way. Okay, when there are people in America who had already connected to their cultural roots. You had Mande. You had people who knew they was from the Mandinka. You had people who knew they was from the tribes of Mali and things of that nature, who had an identity. So, and that identity has to be consistent with your belief in your culture. You see what I'm saying? And again, you know, I come from the oldest Islamic organization in America, and we are older than these terms. These are not actual real historical terms. So it's very important that we reintroduce, okay, a new cultural paradigm. They will never see Islam looking through the eyes of their slave masters. You know, like Frederick Douglass said, he had 3 different names. You see, the names in which they assigned to the slaves was no more than a patent, or they was branded with that for identity. It had nothing to do with ethnicity. Every slave on the plantation could have the last name Johnson and not be related. There's no inheritance that came from that. So we need to revisit the cultural revolution that started in the very inception of Islam in this society and begin to turn people towards that. And that's how they're going to connect with Africa. They cannot connect with Africa using the king's language, carrying the king's name, having the king's religion, if that's a return that they desire. And Malcolm realized that, and that's why he said X. Okay, he doesn't have a last name. He's been cut off from his family and so forth. And he was trying to reconnect. And the only authentic and legitimate connection that we have with Africa is that of Islamic Africa.
Subhanallah. Sheikh, they're telling me to come back to the book because this week I have a question. I need to, that axis, it brings a lot of axes in mind. But here's the thing. I'm going to read the passage from the book, and I just want you to expound on that a bit. I'm going to do that for a while because there's such amazing stuff in here. Brothers and sisters, please pick up this book. And it really reconnected me to my identity as a Muslim, what I'm supposed to be doing, Sheikh. It says here, the story of martyrdom and that which martyrdom challenges is so sensitive, so belovedly exciting, that it pulls the spirit towards paradise as well as the fire. Those are some amazing words. I don't know how you come up. Here's the thing. It paralyzes logic. It weakens the most articulate speech. Martyrdom is mixture of refined love and a deep, complex wisdom. In order to gain some understanding of martyrdom, the ideological schools from which it takes its meaning, its expression, and its value must be explored. Yani, this is... so what is it, Sheikh? What are you trying to tell to the Muslims? Someone who's reading this book, right?
Yeah.
You obviously have done the commentary on this. So what should we understand from that paragraph?
What is being expressed in that paragraph is that to be a Muslim, okay, and in any time requires a high level of sacrifice. Okay, if you want to come forward, I don't mean a casual Muslim, but if you want to preserve Islam, to be a champion to protect the faith and the faithful, it requires, okay, a higher level of sacrifice. And what do you have as an individual to bring on the altar to be sacrificed? None but yourself. And in that manner, okay, you have to be willing, okay, in order to move forward. And it paralyzes logic because no one can understand the heart of a person who has surrendered completely to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for justice, for fairness, for equality, for peace. A person who steps forward, you know, and places himself, you know, in the position of martyrdom, which could be a result of speaking the truth, okay? A person who puts himself in that position, right, gains the empathy of the society, you know, because the human being intrinsically, they're all connected. And the evil at some point could be extinguished, okay, by them witnessing an ultimate sacrifice. And I think that when a person really measure his faith, okay, it's measured on how much he's willing to sacrifice to further the cause of Islam. And the martyrdom is the most passive route, okay? It's not an aggression. You know, people look at a martyrdom as someone who go out here and just, you know, I want to get blown up. No, this is not. The martyrdom, his death is not anticipated. You know, it's not structured. He just becomes aware of the fact that the message in which he is delivering, okay, will be met with consequences because there's an invested interest in the opposition to maintain control over the mental states of the masses. So that's where martyrdom itself began to get its traction.
Then here's what you, subhanAllah, I mean, here's the thing. Then you said, he said, he could have chosen, you're talking about Malcolm X here, or Malik Shahbaz, rahimahullah, he said, he could have chosen the path of complacency, like many Muslims so often choose. Yet that he chose martyrdom, not by imitation, but because of his enlightened mind, fearing none but his Lord in his fight against social injustice. And then you quote Abu Hurairah radiallahu anh, hadith of the Prophet sallam, the worst evil within a man is his restless greed and his utmost cowardice. And then let me just read one more here. It says, instead of seeking paradise, you're still talking about the Muslims of today, when the opportunity presents itself, even if it means going to the battlefield in defense of Islam, they strive for it in retreat through ascetic disciplines and retire into the mediation of divine love and long fasting and modification, self-abnegation and abnegation and supererogatory praise or sunnah, while depriving themselves of the greater reward. Sheikh, are we lying to ourselves? Are we thinking that, is this what's happening? I mean, are the Muslims have become so pacifist that now they want to do everything possible to escape the reality of that this Islam came, that it's a struggle, you're not going to go to Jannah for free?
You have two questions here. The first one is that we talked about the first question you asked about Malcolm choosing martyrdom over complacency.
Yes.
Very few is aware that Malcolm was given political asylum in 3 countries.
Oh.
He was offered, yes, he was given asylum in Ghana by the American Ghanaian community. They invited him there because, as you realize, Malcolm was safer when he was traveling than when he was actually in the States.
Yes.
Also,
many of us feel that way.
Saudi Arabia extended their hands and they gave him an invite to come and live as guest of the kingdom. Okay, and also Ethiopia gave him an invitation to come there to live. Malcolm had options outside of the country. Okay, he could have chose that. He could have went there and he could have relaxed. Okay, many people that left the Nation of Islam defected. They went into hiding. They went into seclusion. Okay, and but Malcolm didn't. You know, he chose to stay and stand firm and resist that force. Okay. Now, today we know that the Muslims are challenged, you know, and I mentioned this in a lot of my talks, that anytime, you know, in modern history that Muslims are cited or Islamists are cited, it's cited in a very negative way. Okay, you can pick up any history book and it's going to start with 9/11, September. The airstrikes. It's going to talk about weapons of mass destruction. It's going to talk about Islam being a looming threat for global peace. These are all the negatives that are coming at the Muslims, and Muslims are very frightful of this. They are intimidated. In fact, they are seeking to be what we call politically or religiously correct or politically correct. They don't want to challenge their very rights of freedom of assembly, freedom of speech, and things of this nature, freedom of religious practices. They don't want to challenge them. A lot of them have drawn back from the dawah. If you go back 30, 40 years ago, Islam was everywhere. Everyone had material. Everyone was speaking about Islam. Everyone was inviting people to Islam. But all of a sudden now, there's no dawah. There's no invitation. You see, and Islam itself is an invitation to peace. It's an invitation to tranquility. It's an invitation to actually reestablish yourself in your natural inclination of goodness to worship the Creator. But what has happened, unfortunately, as we mentioned earlier, the failed states, as we see the revolution reoccurring, is no more than these Islamic states and African states trying to reinvent themselves, okay, and that reinvention brings about a violent response. Okay, this is not Islam. As I mentioned, we haven't seen an Islamic model for over 200 years.
I mean, they call themselves Islamic states, of course, but that's what,
right. So
that's all they are.
We have chosen. So, and again, we have to look at the dynamics. You know, Islam in America, you know, and our role as da'iyah, as callers and preachers of Islam, is very much different from someone who is trying to reestablish Islam in an Islamic country as the state religion. The dynamics are different. So I think that what happened is through media, there's no real discretion being made. So they see you giving dawah in New York City or Florida, and then they look at the conflict and that's going on in Syria and places like that. They equate the two as the same, that you are either recruiting or that you are trying to bring about some type of dissent within inside of the society, when it's just a clear message to invite people to God. So I think that we need education. I think that the Imam and the preachers of Islam and the leadership needs to come forward. And I think they need to be strong enough to receive the criticism, to actually enter into that intellectual battle to protect Islam and its integrity. And beyond that, I think that we're going to lose not only in ourselves, but I think we're going to lose a generation. I think that if we do not repel that with positive dialogue, that especially the American-born Muslims, whether they come abroad in their second, third generation here, they begin to synchronize themselves in the American society and they find their comfort zone. And when they look at Islam as they perceive it to be Islam in those war-torn countries, it's distasteful. It's distasteful for them, and they don't want anything to do with that. And we are trying everything we can, as you know, as an imam, as a da'i, to try to rescue our youth, to try to pull them out of, you know, this cesspool of iniquity, of chaos and corruption that is eroding the very fabric of Islam. And that's because we as leaders have become docile. Okay, we have found ourselves involved in all the other social struggles, Black Lives Matter, and I'm for justice, I'm for equality, I'm for fairness and so forth. But I think that we risk losing our Islamic identity when we enter into these forums, not as Muslims, but just as social activists or people who are in the plight for social justice.
Sheikh, how important, and this is so. I mean, what's missing, Sheikh, when you know when you talk about these? For instance, I mean, you talked about social justice movements. Let's say Black Lives Matter for now. And you find a lot of Muslim imams are talking about this and in the name of civil rights and this and that. And then also some of them will even consider being homosexual as a civil right. And then you have people are going, Muslim imams are part of these, you know, movements and things like this. Sheikh, I mean, what happens if Muslims now, in the name of social justice, start joining such things? What happens to our children? I mean, if they see an imam, somebody who's supposed to be a leader in the community, is now part of, I don't know what to call it.
Yeah, yes. Bismillah. You know, my brother Sheikh Muhammad Sharazi, you know, we have not actually scratched, you know, the tip of the iceberg. We are actually dealing with 10% of this deen. And unfortunately, we have people who only have knowledge, 10% knowledge of this deen, okay, coming out presenting it as though they have 90% of the deen. And I think it's a lack of education, okay, because now the scholarship, Islamic scholarship, is acquired through an academia. I think it's more or less our Ummah or our leaders
Institutionalized.
more or less like institutionalized. So we have more so theologians than we have imams. So when we begin to try to make the corrections, it becomes a theological debate because there's no substance there. It's all symbolism because we are not relying on textual proofs for our actions. Okay, now because I'm in a safe haven or safe zone, I can rewrite or reinterpret the book the way that it fits into society, and it will be received and embraced by the society. I think that is the danger of the compromise that we have reached at this particular point.
But why are we trying so hard to fit in, Sheikh? Why are we trying so hard? We're giving it all we have, our wealth, our money, our children, to fit in so bad that it might even remove us.
You know, I tell you, and I say this through experience, you know, when I was growing up, you know, in my early days, in my teens as a Muslim, that's all I wanted to be. You know, I wrote a book called Color Me Muslim. It's out of print, but inshallah, it'll be back on the market. And I wrote this book as a survival guide to show American-born Muslims how to navigate and how to be proud and how to champion that Islam. That's all we wanted to be, was a Muslim. We wanted to be different in every way that we could possibly imagine to be a Muslim, okay? Because we were being taught what Islam was. We was being taught that Islam was complete, that it was comprehensive, and that it could facilitate all of our life expressions and needs and so forth. However, and again, being a person born, right, under the Jim Crow legislation, I was seasoned for that. And I was willing and ready for a change, okay, ready for a change. And I didn't see, you know, in America, okay, anything hopeful beyond the scopes of Islam. Now, what has happened is, when we look at racism and discrimination, Sheikh, there's also a social exclusion, okay? That means that people of color was excluded. So now when we see our brothers and sisters come from, foreign countries like, immigrants and so forth, they are not socially excluded. They are able to be integrated into the economics. Okay, they're able to be integrated into the social fabric of America. So they are progressive, and so they would look at someone who's indigenous and who is a Muslim, and they will wonder, how have you been here for 200 years and you still have small masjids? Okay, you're still struggling for funds. You can't properly pay your imams. And we've been here only 5 years and we have built a cathedral or masjid and so forth and so on, because they are unaware of the cultural restraints that have been put upon indigenous people. And even as we speak, there is an agenda to marginalize immigrant Muslims, okay, from indigenous Muslims. So you see the gap is widening now. It's widening.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's a very interesting point.
20 years ago, we championed each other. We didn't see this type of division. Now we have the black and white nexus reappearing. So the indigenous Muslims now are gravitating towards more of the black paradigm than they are of the Islamic paradigm, and they have more affinity, okay, just to the black society, regardless of whether they are Muslim or non-Muslim, than they do with the Muslims, regardless of their place of origin. So we see this right now and now we have those Muslims who have abandoned their station of da'wah, calling to Islam, okay, and they see it's advantageous to become a social activist, because that's where their attention is now. Okay, there's no threat there because you are politically correct, and so you fit into that current. Okay, but there's a great compromise that goes along with that. And again, if we put Islam in the same category as civil rights, okay, then we have undermined the completion of Islam, because Islam has given us our values, our moral system. We don't have to compromise who we are. And America allows that. America champions diversity. Why I cannot disagree with a political agenda? Why can I not disagree with a social agenda, and so forth and so on? And we need to reserve that right, and we need to actually begin to address this before we fall off into something that is very, very harmful for the next generation.
Sheikh, I mean, you said, look, did Malcolm live? I mean, look, there's two Americas.
Yes.
Right? Two Americas. It's very obvious to those that can see what's happening in the country. Now, do you think that we understand that? Those who have come to this country, the immigrants, do they understand the America that you want us to understand? And the reason why I say that is because I was at a khutbah today, and there was an imam, and he was saying, the America the Great, and this and that, and all of this. And when I'm reading your book, and you're saying, look, man, for the last 400 years, they have done nothing but enslaved us. So are we on our side, we don't want to rock the boat. On your side, you're saying, wake up before you don't even know who you are anymore.
Yes. I don't think that our brothers who have come to America are fully aware of the history here. Even our brother Usman Ahmed, who encountered Haj Malik Shabazz in his early life when he was a student at the Dartmouth University, he said that, and I quote, that the Black Americans, right, are really discriminated against. He saw oppression in that. He said, but I myself have not felt any type of racism. Maybe because I'm from a noble country. Meaning that they know the difference. Okay. The society would give the immigrants a pass because they don't want them to see the shame. They don't want them to champion or rescue those downtrodden and rejected people. We've been here for, again, 80 some odd years as Muslims, struggling, okay, trying to build masjids, trying to build institutions and dawah institutions, but there's no integration at a level that constitutes progress, okay? What I mean by that is that we are actually catering to the segregated concept in America, because you come to America as a Muslim, but you gravitate to an ethnic group of Muslims. And this is across the country, that we have accepted segregation as a form of Islamic denomination. So it's okay to be next door to me with a masjid as long as you're ethnically different. You see, and this is why we're not moving forward. And there's a huge rejection. Okay, and I'm saying this to say that it's not only from the immigrant side that the Americans, the indigenous Muslims in America, especially those people of color, has been taught to reject, okay, foreign Muslims. Okay, you know, there's an agenda to create animosity and enmity between indigenous Muslims and foreign Muslims. For example, when you talk about the issue of Black Lives Matter, they say, well, the Muslims are insensitive to our plight because they don't know the history. They do not know that, you know, in the early 20s, we had what we call the anti-miscegenation laws. We had segregation laws, meaning that the Muslims that came from Lebanon and Syria, Turkey, who was classified as white, by legal legislation, were not able to integrate with people of color to teach them Islam. And that is why we saw the people from Sudan that was actually effective in bringing dawah to people of color, because they was able to get through the cracks without being noticed and so forth. So there's a historical backdrop that I think that our brothers needs to be orientated about in order to move forward. And it's not going to be captured in the textbooks. You could come through Harvard University, you could come to Georgetown, and you will still come out with the British eye. You know, you will still come out with the idea that there's it's only a financial economic differences in the people, not a social exclusion that has caused this problem.
We have, I'm being told also to take questions here. So there's a lot of questions coming too while I'm, and we have, Sheikh, just before I go to the questions, just what.
But could I just say something so that when we look at Hajj Malik Shabazz, you know, he's projected as a very angry man. But if you knew the history and his early experience, we would have to say he was not angry enough. He was, based on what he faced, he was a pacifist. Anyone who had lived through that type of dehumanization would have to be considered a pacifist, you see, because nothing that was done, you know, to these people could be justified. You know, 300 plus lynchings, you know, killings, you know, illegal incarcerations, all the way down to being sentenced to death, you know, illegal. So when we look at the backdrop, these people have suffered a lot. So when Al-Hajj Malik Shabazz came out, he came out with an anger that matched the hostilities of the society. You see?
I mean, that was the only way to survive. You won't be able to survive.
That was the only way to survive. And what happened is we do not find his material in the contemporary history books.
Sheikh,
it has been banned.
Why is it in the West, Sheikh? Why is this in the idea that you know, you said something in another chapter of the book, there was in the book that said that, look, human beings are being identified as animals. We are animal beings. We are such and such. And, you know, you talk about how human beings are just kind of, oh, you're just connected to your instincts and that's all you are, like an animal. Sheikh, I mean, when people cry out of oppression, when they scream out of oppression, when they say enough is enough, and then the blame is then actually put back on me for saying enough is enough. Why do we see? Why is that so common in the West more than anywhere else, Sheikh, where the oppressed is not supposed to say I'm being oppressed?
Yes, because again, the very foundation of America is a deception, and this type of history is being concealed, and they don't want the world to know that these people were oppressed.
I mean, were we
by
just
them
animals? That's
deny-
what I was saying. Are we just supposed to be just animals? That's it.
Well, again, they control the narrative. We don't have a universal support system, built to address these issues. I give you an example. Haj Malik Shabazz wanted to take the United States to the United Nations and indict them for human rights violation. But in order to get on the international platform, a sovereign nation, had to surrender their platform for him. And that's why he was working so diligently in the African countries, trying to get one of those countries to consent to give him an opportunity to address the human rights violations and the atrocities that the people of color were suffering in America. And he was almost to that point. He was in Egypt with Kamal Abdel Nasser. He was poisoned in Europe. And he
He was
came back
poisoned
and
in
he
Europe.
said
I didn't
that,
know this. Subhanallah.
yes. And he was refused to enter into France. And also, when he came back, he said that the order for his death is from a higher order. He realized that he actually went to a point of no return. Okay, and it's like it's very, very sensitive to even revisit Haj Malik Shabaz's life, because what it does is it opens up a can of worms. It makes us revisit the very atrocities that we faced as a people in the 50s and 60s, and how it was tapered out with the civil rights movement. Even Dr. King, in his later speeches, began to criticize America for its high-level hypocrisy and how it undermined its very own citizens while it was trying to champion democracy in other countries and so forth and so on, while it was bringing people in from foreign countries, giving them land grants and undergirding that with funding and so forth, while the people that were here, okay, that had come through the Emancipation Proclamation and their descendants was actually told to pick themselves up by their own bootstraps. And this is still going on today. People cannot assess properly the condition of those people until they understand that backdrop and that history.
Subhanallah. Sheikh, do you think that this generation of Africans, I mean the African Americans, let's say, or the youth that we see, what kind of work has been done to distance them from being like Malcolm X?
Now, and this answer here is probably a very controversial answer.
I like controversy.
We have in our culture, when you look at, and this also speaks to Malcolm's martyrdom. Malcolm himself defected from a very powerful organization. Okay, a very powerful organization. And we know the results of that the people who were responsible for taking his life was from that core group. And that's on record, And we still have people loving both sides. The question is, how can you champion Malcolm and his transformation and his full development as a Muslim, but yet and still you hold on to the affinity to the very same organization that he defected from? It's an oxymoron, you see. So we are confusing the youth. We are telling them that there's no need for any more Malcolms because everyone loves him now. Okay? Everyone loves him. Oh, we made a big mistake. But yet and still, Malcolm was a Muslim. And we're not leading them to Islam, because we have reached the point, Sheikh, that as long as you have Islam attached to your organization, you say, I'm a Muslim or I believe in Islam, as far as it goes. So we can be 100 different types of Muslims and we all the same. And that's the confusion, okay? Because there's no real education, there's no real opposition, there's no real correction going on. So the youth themselves, are not motivated to bring about change because they don't know what is correct and what is incorrect. Okay. And they just feel as though that as long as you say you are Muslim, it doesn't matter what your orientation is, we okay. And the rules of engagement will be written by the American scholars, okay, who best know how we should live
that's
out
very
our
interesting.
lives. And so we're not going to produce any more Malcolms under those what we call guidelines. And the very conversation that we're having, okay,
Subhanallah. Amazing
I can
statement. Yes.
and I know that from my orientation and my background that it's very controversial and it's not what we call consistent with the current narrative today. Okay, because like I said, I am a recipient of that revolution. You know what I'm saying? And what has entered the books, right, was known 30, 40 years ago. And they should be consulting with those recipients, okay, those survivors, to see if the information that they have is correct, okay, and are they properly applying Islam, you know, in the manner in which it should be applied in this society with an inclusion to get the desired results. And I tell you, Sheikh, that there are some brothers who are actually watching the progress of the Muslims. You know, everyone is not sucked in, okay, to the what we call the internet, you know, education that we're getting from Islam today. There are some people who still desire a hands-on traditional Islamic training, and I think that when you look at the struggle of Malcolm, and Malcolm died at the gates of Islam. Malcolm did not have enough time to develop the necessary scholarship, okay? But he was on that road. And again, when you look at the Janazah picture, why? You have to ask the question, why is the person, okay, in that photo not recognized, okay, in the Islamic narratives in America? You know, because they don't want people to know that this is the direction in which Malcolm was going in. And there was a community of Muslims already, you know, established, okay, moving forward, okay, and they don't want them to know that. Alex Haley, go ahead. Let me say this about Alex. Alex Haley is probably the most authoritative novel, okay, on the life of Malcolm. But he froze Malcolm in time because he could not properly articulate, okay, that transformation of Malcolm as he became a Muslim. Okay, he just left it as a person who defected from one organization and joined another ideology, but not understanding what Islam was. So we have here in our midst today, okay, a misconception of Haj Malik Shabazz. And again, the person who buried Malcolm was on the front line of the social revolution. Haji Sham Jaaber was cited in the Kerner report for social disorders, okay, in 1967, stopping the riots, okay, who stood between the rioters and the tanks flanked with National Guards to stop a bloodbath, a slaughter, okay. What I'm saying is that this movement has been going on. You know, it's not like the Underground Railroad. Nobody know about it. It's just that the media has refused to capture that, okay, to bring that to the forefront, to identify the Islamic presence. Out of 4,800 pages in American history books, not one Muslim of the antebellum is mentioned by name, when 1 out of 4 slaves that was in America come from Muslim countries. We have to ask ourselves, is there a mass suppression of our Islamic identity, and for what reason?
Subhanallah. Let me go to these 3 questions, Sheikh. First of all, there is a salam being given by Brother Idris Palmer to you. I'm sure you know who Brother Idris is.
Yes.
Then we have...
keep the good work up. Yes.
And then you have Brother Thabit Shahbaz. He asks, Sheikh, are you familiar with W.D. Muhammad's community in Georgia? Or is it, I think, yeah, Georgia. He converted a lot of brothers and sisters to Islam.
Yes, I'm familiar with the community in Georgia. Yes.
Okay. And then there's another question by Isra Abdul Ghani. She says, what do you think Malcolm X would say about the present condition of the Muslims? That's it. That's the answer.
Yeah, yes, I think that he would be a little disappointed that, you know, and I want to say this, and it's very relevant to Malcolm's experience in Arabia when he went to Mecca. What Malcolm saw there was a utopia. He saw the model, the perfect model of Islam, and Malcolm came back with it. In the Muslims, he saw the perfect model, and anyone who made the pilgrimage to Mecca can understand his experience. This is the perfect world for the human beings to live in. And as Malcolm, you know, when he came back and he began to encounter Muslims, okay, Malcolm at a certain point was a little shy and embarrassed, okay, to run and join the Muslims. You know, like my father has always said that they was a little disappointed with Malcolm when he came back from Mecca and he established the Muslims Incorporated, and he had all the internal problems inside of the organization that he didn't join the Muslims. Okay, Malcolm was somewhat in a state of isolation from the Sunni community, and also somewhat in a state of denial that they were actually effective. And when he made the pilgrimage, he said, I doubt that there's any other American Negroes, he used the term, to have made the pilgrimage besides himself. Okay, and that was in 1964, where my father had made a Hajj in 1962, and we had hundreds of Muslims, Sunni Muslims, who had performed the Hajj. Okay, and I'm saying that to say that there was a vibrant Muslim community. Now, when Malcolm was assassinated, his sister Ella Collins took over the Muslims Incorporated. Okay, and that organization had to go through a transformation because there was awarded scholarships for the students to go study abroad. And my father is the one who appointed James Small as the imam of that community because he was neutral and had no affiliation with the Nation of Islam or none of those other organizations. So he thought he would be best fitted to actually run that organization. However, he abandoned his post. Now, the Malcolm began to travel to Africa, and he looked at socialism, you know, as another form of neocolonialism. And eventually he would have rejected a lot of the principles and policies there. The last time he went to Ghana to see Nkrumah, okay, Nkrumah was given a letter or a telex from America saying, we would be very disappointed if you honored this dissident. Meaning that as they removed the British colonizers from their lands, they re-signed a treaty of agreement and hope with America. And while they was trying to decolonize their country and reestablish African rule, America was still running their segregation and discrimination policies. So Malcolm was beginning to see that. And Nkrumah refused to see Malcolm on his second visit until W.D. Du Bois' wife encouraged him that he had to sit down with Malcolm. So I'm saying that Malcolm travels in Africa, right? He was beginning to see that even socialism, okay, was no more than another form of neocolonialism. And he was beginning to push back from those things. So he would be very disappointed to see the state of the Ummah today. With all the knowledge and scholarship we have, brother, you know, you have to ask yourself, how much of it do we apply? And the lack of application of Islam, right, actually says a lot for the state of being that we're in. Why we don't want to come together as Muslims? Okay, why are we separated? I'm just one individual on the East Coast. Okay, I can only do so much, but there are other people who have resources. Okay, and they have contacts. Okay, and they could do more for Islam. but yet and still, we have to ask the question, why?
Sheikh, this has to be done on the next show. Why? But the last question, inshallah, because of the time. I know we've already way over
Yeah.
time. But
Yeah.
last question, Sheikh. You mentioned something very important. You said that look, under the guidelines of today's ulama, there is no way that you can produce, or American ulama, I guess, that you can produce Malcolm X's that we are looking for. Is this, and I agree, I mean, is this a strategic decision made somewhere that we need to produce American ulama that can Americanize Islam?
I don't see Islam as being defined by demographics.
No, I'm saying,
I don't
from
think
the American strategy perspective, that look, let's produce a American type Islam that will keep,
yeah, I understand exactly what you're saying. I didn't say ulama. I said I'm looking at the ulama is a different category of Muslims. I mean, and when I say ulama, I'm really talking about genuine, authentic scholars. I think I used the term theologians.
Yes,
I think
yes,
that,
Jazakallah khair, you did. And thank you for the
we
correction,
have,
actually. Yes.
I think that we, America is a type of society that we have freedom of religion, freedom of press, freedom of assembly, freedom of speech, and things like that. So it's very easy for you to acquire an academic level of Islamic scholarship, okay, and that as far as it needs to go. That gives you enough credentials to actually represent Islam in the political and social circles without any type of refutation. But when we're talking about producing a map, I don't think the climate itself would need that type of rhetoric, that type of what we call force as we have Malcolm. But I think the intellectual component, the ability to articulate and strategize and bring Islam to the minds of a people in this type of we call a democratic capitalistic society that can empower them and it calls them to actually bring a healing to the society. I think that we're close enough. Malcolm lived in two worlds, distinct two worlds. I think now these worlds are a little overlapping. I think that we can have dialogue, and I think that we have to stop looking at Islam as just a religion for Africans and third world countries. Okay, that it is not, its standards is not high enough to encompass the Europeans. You see, this is something, we have somewhat an inferiority complex in ourselves because we humble ourselves and we compromise ourselves when it's not necessary. Okay, the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, he took Islam not only to the orphans and the miskin, the poor and the downtrodden, rejected, and the slaves, but he's also sent letters to heads of state, inviting them to this glorious religion of Islam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent Musa, not only to Bani Israel, but he sent him to Pharaoh. You know what I'm saying? So we have to make Islam, okay, appealing, okay, to not only for the downtrodden and oppressed, but also for those who are the elite class in the society. And Islam is a matter of conviction of the heart. You don't know what is in a person's heart. We take it for granted. Though I'm from a third world country, I'm from a refugee country, and America their standards are too high for this religion. So we think that we have to compromise Islam and remove certain factors or certain articles from it in order to attract them. And I don't think that's necessary. I think that if we ourselves break down these ethnic barriers, I think that if we can actually bring Islam forward without having customs and culture attached to it and present it as a unified brotherhood, I think that it will break down these racial restraints. And I think that it will actually soften the hearts of America. And I really believe that Islam is the solution, as Malcolm said, to the race problem in America. I don't see any other system, any other ism that has the power and the profundity that Islam has to touch the heart of the human being. And that's my journey That's my dawah, is to invite humanity to Islam, you see. And I think that if we deviate from that and try to reinvent or reinterpret Islam in a manner in which it would fit the society, I think that we're going to lose tremendously.
Subhanallah. With that, inshallah, brothers, Sheikh, I wanted you to say the last few words, but I think that's the perfect moment to leave it. Leave it there, where, invitation to Islam, to mankind. وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ. This is the best and the most perfect way to leave it, Sheikh. And really, inshallah, Sheikh, I don't think we can still, we will have to come back to this, the second part. There is a lot to discuss, to continue with this book, inshallah. I want to discuss the tradition part. I want to discuss some of the da'wah work that was done later on, that in many ways we enjoy today because of the struggle that scholars like you have done. And that's the reality that we need to still discuss. Because I think we forget there is a lot of sacrifices before us, while we are now kind of just scratching the surface. If you want to few words, okay, go ahead, Fadal Sheikh.
And I want to say that the book that we produced, I Buried Malcolm, serves as the validity to his Islam, and Malcolm's wife, Hajja Bahir Betty Shabazz, may Allah put light in her grave and give her Jannah, who my father was privy to actually bury her. Okay, and she herself cried out to the Muslims. She said that the black nationalists has claimed Malcolm. She said the liberals has claimed Malcolm. But when are the Muslims going to claim Malcolm? When are we going to see Malcolm as a Muslim, okay, with all the principles that governs a Muslim? When are we going to join him in that journey and protect his Islamic integrity? This is what it's all about. And I think that if we can actually reestablish Malcolm in the society as a Muslim, that would be a centerpiece for dawah. Everyone is interested in Malcolm, okay? But what Malcolm are they interested in? The Malcolm Little, the Malcolm X, or Al-Hajj Malik Shabazz? And that is a world of differences in the experiences and the transformations of those beings.
Subhanallah, mashallah, jazakallah khair, Sheikh. Again, brothers and sisters, here's the book. I'm putting it out here. Maybe go this way. Yeah. There you go. That's the book.
And the link is I Buried Malcolm, iburiedmalcolm.com. That is the link if you were interested in the book, iburiedmalcolm.com.
So brothers, it's very important that Muslims read this book from all backgrounds. It takes you through the history of the struggle of Muslims from all the way from 1920s, 30s across till today. And it may be a reawakening in many ways to see what kind of struggle is necessary in order to bring back Islam and to bring back da'wah, like the way the Sheikh was mentioning, an ideological struggle per se, to bring people to Islam, because it's right in front of our eyes, brothers and sisters. Everybody's looking for a purpose today. People are dying for no reasons. People are, subhanAllah, you find people committing suicide. People have wealth, people have name, people have all kinds of status, but then subhanAllah, there's emptiness everywhere. And that's the reason, and that's the void this deen fulfills. So jazakallah khair, Sheikh, for coming on the show, for actually, it was an honor to have you. And as I always say, this will not be the last time, inshallah. We still have a lot to discuss from this book. And for the rest of the brothers and sisters, please do me a favor. It's important that we read. It's important that we make sure that our children get this book in their hands. It's very important that they realize the history of Islam in the United States, the struggle of the Muslims in the United States, what they have done, our forefathers, those who have come and made sure that we are able to speak about Islam today. It's a must. It's something. It's a responsibility that we have to the likes of Malcolm X, rahmatullah alayh, that we continue his struggle and we continue his work which is to call to the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Brothers and sisters, Jazakumullah khairan. I know it was a bit longer than expected, but when you have people like the Sheikh we had, there is no way that I'm just going to let him go in an hour and a half. Jazakumullah khairan for attending. Inshallah, see you guys next week, Friday. We have amazing scholars coming out this whole month, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
لا لن يطول الظلام، ديننا لن يضام، نحن جيل الهمام، نحن فينا عمر. لا 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 لن يطول الظلام، ديننا لن يضام، نحن جيل الهمام، نحن فينا عمر.
صبح بدا نور ظهر، نجم وشمس وقمر، ألقى على الدنيا الدرر. ذا عمر
لا تدوم الجراح، بل سيأتي الصباح، نحن أهل الكفاح، نحن فينا عمر. لا لا لن تدوم الجراح، بل سيأتي الصباح، نحن أهل الكفاح.